Okay, and we're live. Exciting times at the Illusion Horror and Con. Welcome everyone who is out on YouTube and out on Twitch. Thanks for joining us. You're probably used to seeing David or Crystal. They're part of the world. It's dark, and they're went down for a long night's sleep. My name is Ryan, the other organizer of the Illusion Horror and Con, and with me this evening are four great people from different facets of the horror industry. And they have joined me tonight and everyone who is out on YouTube and Twitch to talk about the importance of setting and atmosphere in horror RPGs. And before we get started, if you would like to ask questions, feel free to post them in the live chat on YouTube or on Twitch, and we'll try to get to those at the very end. But at this moment, I'd like to just introduce and pass the floor to these wonderful people who have kind of joined us here tonight. I'll just go through, go around, and each one can just give a brief just about who you are, your background, what you've worked on, what you're working on. Feel free to give any plugs to any projects you're working on, and we'll get going. First, we'll just kind of go around the screen, and we'll start with T.A. Newman. Who are you?
Hello, I am T.A. Newman. I'm the host of the Miskatonic Playhouse. We are a YouTube and podcast company. We primarily work on Miskatonic repository, so community titles where we actually play them, and we actually play them as well. I'm also a writer, so I've written a few scenarios that are print on demand, lecture and bestsellers, and I'm working for the first time actually on this is developing me as a writer. I'm working on a campaign book, which is significantly stretching my abilities, talents, and my reliance on very smart, clever people that I know that I can say, "Can you help me?" And that's about it for today, I think.
Nice. And Mr. John Hook, who are you?
Thank you, Ryan. I'm John Hook. I'm a writer and podcaster, primarily known as a writer for Call of Cthulhu. And for podcasting, I was a original host for the Miskatonic University podcast. And I'm currently hosting the Modern Mythos with Seth Skorkowski. That's it for me.
Nice. I'm glad both of you are here. Travis Legge, who are you?
Hi, my name's Travis. My pronouns are he and they. I write and develop games. I most recently for Onyx Path have did some writing on The World Below, which is kind of a survival fantasy / horror game. Done some work for World of Darkness and some stuff for Scarred Lands. Been writing with Onyx Path for the last 5 or 6 years or so as a freelancer. Been in the business myself for like 15 or 20 years, self-publishing via Aegis Studios. And I'm also the Twitch programming coordinator over at Onyx Path. And happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for being here as well. And Mr. Graeme Patrick, who are you? And tell us about yourself.
Hello, I'm Graeme Patrick. I run RPG Nook, a YouTube channel breaking down scenarios. I also write for It Slayed Nobody and have been doing audio dramas this year for a handful of different podcasts as well, including Rusty Quill and creepy podcast as well on Bloody Disgusting FM. And I've also released a bunch of scenarios myself that's available on the Drive-Thru RPG.
And what's
Awesome.
the name of your cat?
She's back. She'll never piss off. That's the problem.
Oh, that's no problem. Animals are welcome. I have a dog myself who just kind of laying down. I can't move the camera, but he's a cuddle bug.
Yeah, she's upset because I bought her a tunnel system today.
Nice. Okay. This panel is about the importance of setting an atmosphere in horror RPGs, whether that be the era it is kind of set in, or places where folks like yourselves or other designers, authors, aspiring authors have kind of written scenarios or settings. In this case, for the horror genre. So if we'll just go through just some questions, and we'll just go around to kind of get everyone's opinion, and feel free to have a discussion, and just a natural conversation. So I guess the first question. How does this kind of gets into the settings of it? How does the choice of, like, when you're designing modules or stories or scenarios, how does the choice of setting influence the overall atmosphere that you try to bring out in your horror RPG? And kind of when you're designing it, what are some tactics that you use to kind of bring a chilling ambience to the scenario you're trying to write?
I typically write in a era that I am most comfortable with. With Call of Cthulhu, I am most experienced and most comfortable with just the classic 1920s jazz era. And setting, can be incredibly important because, every scenario is set somewhere, right? I haven't found the one that is just set in the void and you're just tumbling through darkness. But depending upon the type of story, the type of scenario that you're trying to craft, settings sometimes can be moodable, right? You might be able to say, okay, I wrote this for 1920s in a small town, but it could just as easily be set modern in a small or large town. And that can be flexible, but other times you are very dependent upon the setting itself. I'm working on a witch scenario. It'll be a short convention length, scenario, but it'll have a witch monster, and it is very specifically set deep in the dark woods, isolated and alone. And then that way, the setting, dark woods, isolated cabin, will play on the kind of tropes that people already associate with that type of setting. And I want them to do that. I want the players and the game master to go, oh, isolated cabin in the woods, because how many movies have we seen with that, right? I want those thoughts and those feelings to just inherently be there. I'm depending upon it so that when they go to play this game, it will play and add to their own fears because they're scaring themselves. They're already bringing that baggage into the game.
I think as an era, like a setting, if we're choosing a time, and I've written, my first 3 scenarios are in 1920s. Been working on a modern one, but the big campaign one I've been working on is it's part of the Regency Cthulhu era. So there's a huge, like, significant impact when someone plays Regency Cthulhu in that setting. There is an atmosphere that I suppose is expected. Obviously that'll be changed and manipulated, but I think there's they are significantly different things, but there is like a vehicle from one to the other. So the setting of, as we, could be that we're in a deep dark woods. That's the setting, but the actual mood and atmosphere that's created, as John's saying, you might want to use specific tricks to hook people into tropes that they already know. You might want to invite them into those moments, but at the same time, you might want to change that atmosphere so that it becomes unsettling or unnerving, so that they expect a certain trick or a trope, or they expect a certain aspect of it, but your players actually find that they get something different from it. I would say with an era, with a time period as a setting, let alone a location or a historical event that we all might know and know something about, there is, people want to play those historical settings because they probably know something about it or they want to explore it. So there has to be a sense of authenticity to it. There has to be a sense of you as the keeper, let alone as the author, a certain knowledge. You've got to present that world as the writer for the keeper to then create for their players. And if you're the keeper or the GM or the storyteller, you've got to be in a position to open that world for the players to live in, which can be absolutely amazing and rewarding, but it can also be a little bit scary.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot. I kind of specialize in like Old West. It's kind of how I got into Call of Cthulhu, writing that in that sort of environment, and it tends to be quite bleak and miserable in a lot of ways. It's the frontier. It's got a lot of hope to it, but you've got to strive to survive, basically. But I think I'd divorce setting from atmosphere a little bit, at least, because you can. The atmosphere is kind of like the stage dressing or lighting for the setting. It's like you can change it sort of depending on what kind of mood you actually want, using different types of descriptions and how you want the players to feel about it. So yeah, it's just one of those things you can really change. So I would divorce them a little bit at least. Yeah.
And I would say that, like when left to my own devices, I'm most prone to write modern material, contemporary material, just because I'm lazy and it's the easiest. I just have to look around. But having said that, though, I also find a great deal of fun writing futuristic horror, getting some sci-fi chocolate in my horror peanut butter. It's just the thing with that is you have to be quite careful when you do to ensure that the horror story is about the horror that it's about. I think it's very easy when you're hopping around to any sort of historical period to make it more about some little trope or hook of that period than it is about the core horror element in and of itself. So making sure that you're keeping your eye on that particular ball, I think, is very important. And I think that goes into what you were saying about being able to tweak the atmosphere. I wrote a story for Storyteller's Vault for Vampire the Masquerade, and the idea, the sort of central set piece was this nightclub, and the idea was that the players, if they started human, became trapped in this place with a very young vampire who went nuts. And if they're vampires, they're investigating that thing. But that setting in and of itself, there's 10 different ways, 100 different ways to spin. You're trapped in a nightclub. And that's where the atmosphere knob can be tweaked. You can decide, is this going to be, kind of a spooky, mysterious, what's going on? Why can't we get out? Nobody knows what's going on. Or is it, the opening to Blade?
Always got to be opening to Blade.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Just I'm not a scenario writer, but when I look to GM scenarios, I always appreciate the if you're presenting the scenario in the 1920s, or it's modern, or the old Wild West. the way the scenarios are written are most of them have have that material in there to kind of help the GM craft the atmosphere for when they're kind of actually running. And I know there's one thing that I try to do, but I never have enough time doing it, is just trying to watch like either shows or movies that sh- show me like a way to run it, or players who have kind of come in looking for that experience because they have the background and knowledge of it. So in designing of scenarios and bringing these kind of bringing them to life as you're kind of writing them and developing them, what are some of your, I guess, your personal taste for when you're like, if it's the Wild West or modern or the 1920s or futuristic, what are some of your personal go-to movies or shows or other kind of arts and media to kind of help you develop your creations of art?
It's a good question. Several, I guess. Doing Old West is pretty difficult, but it's also got a lot of information out there. There's a lot of tropes that are obviously very cinematic and gritty cinema. You've got your spaghetti westerns, for example, which are very troped, and even the core the setting book for Call of Cthulhu, Down Dark Trails, opens with this is more cinematic TV film type setting than real world. Like what it was like. It tends to open with that, so it tends to be more sort of based on that sort of element of you can survive this, even though it's probably meant to be more brutal than it is. I do tend to run it straight though, so it is more brutal. So I like more bleak and sort of like almost survival element films, like things like what's a good one? 310 to Yuma, when they're going across the desert, sort of thing. They're getting tracked and all that sort of nonsense. That the sort of survival in the desert is something that kind of allures to me. I really like the sort of like the Oregon Trail style sort of horror that's there, and that's what my first scenario was written about. It was crossing the 40-mile desert in Nevada from the sort of Love Rocks to basically the Pacerville, nowadays Pacerville, which was called Hangtown back then. And yeah, it's just about the journey because there's so many different like environments they cross. They cross the desert, which is horrific, filled with salt water that the animals keep on trying to drink, and then you're into the mountains and all the snow and all the rest of it as well. So you change environments a lot and that sort of thing.
I think we Graeme talking about environment there. I think that's a huge thing to recognize, because obviously our environment has changed significantly, especially if you're jumping from different time periods, whether it's you're doing Invictus Cthulhu to whether you're doing modern day or futuristic or Western or Regency, whatever it is that you're doing. The landscape of the world has changed significantly because of our civilization. I think perhaps that goes along with that though, and this is what Graeme was saying anyway, I'm just stealing his ideas to make myself sound good, but there is a social environment as well that comes with that. So there's going to be a way that those characters interact with other characters if they ever saw anybody on that 40-mile desert journey, in the same way that in Regency Cthulhu the social environment is so significant. You might not be in physical environmental danger, but the societal danger that you face, the scandalous censorship that you'll get, and you will be ostracized from society, and your investigators will literally be cut out of their own investigation because they won't be invited to the tea party, etc., where the octopuses are handing out sugar cubes and whatnot. But I think the actual environment, the social environment of a setting can really kind of create that world, and I think that can often be a nice way to deliver. That setting is not just through one of them. It's balancing those two things to give a real sense of the world.
Yeah, in the Old West, you could like walk 40 miles to the next town, and you're not known, and you could be a criminal and just become the mayor. These sort of things. It's ridiculous how isolated you became in these small societies. And the Old West is all about change. It's all about the it's the sort of amalgamation period between nature and society kind of crossing over. And it's like the railways going down really changed the environment. You've got these small eras within the sort of eras of the actual period, and even you get the twilight of the Old West, like the last saloon that gets shut down because of prohibition, just on the sort of eve of the death of the Old West sort of thing.
It's very exciting though, because the whole frontier thing is as well, isn't it? It's like that. It's so horrifically scary, that time period, because of the constant threat of death just by going out. But then also that exciting part of there's parts of the world that still haven't been explored.
Yeah, it's the sense of wonder or something with settings that you have to be very keen on pushing for, especially in horror. If you don't have wonder in horror, it's one of these things which it can fall flat. You've got to have the players wonder why and how did that happen, and that sort of sense of awe. If you don't have that sense of awe, it kind of tampers down the horror a little bit. But yeah, other than that, for sources for Old West, I actually talk to sort of like museums a lot. Just email museums; they'll tell you a ton of stuff.
Yeah, and happy to do it.
Yeah.
If sourcing, film to get an idea for settings is so handy. And for oftentimes you're able to move those into different time periods. Staying with the Old West, one of the things that's a major part of the Old West is the railroad. You could have a setting set aboard a train doing a long distance journey, and in preparation for that, you wouldn't necessarily have to study film of Old West trains. You could just study things like and watch things like Murder on the Orient Express.
Funny you should say that, John.
And get a sense for what life is like in on a train like that with a long journey, that kind of thing. But also documentaries and that kind of thing can help as well. You could have a kind of touching on the cabin in the woods thing. If you really wanted to ensure that your game master, who would be running the scenario that you're writing, would invoke those kinds of feels, is put it in the script. Hey, think about Evil Dead, think about Cabin in the Woods and the way that those films isolated the characters and had the isolated setting. And a game master, hopefully will be already familiar with those movies, especially if they're choosing to run that type of scenario. But that equips them to then present that same type of setting to their players as they do it. If you were going to write something that was set in a factory, you might, check out films that have steel mills or, a logging plant or so, textile plant, but just to get a feel of what it would be like to have a large scale factory, with all kinds of, piping and ductwork and boilers and heavy machinery and automated tools and things, just all kinds of activity and things, and that can help you learn on how you would shape that in your scenario. And that could be appropriate in really any era, right? You just make it the technology match. Maybe it's a steam technology versus computers. Who knows, right?
I agree absolutely 100% with everything that everyone has said, and I just wanted to add I had the good fortune of growing up in the 1980s and 1990s in a small town in Wisconsin that had a video store that didn't care how old you were when you rented movies there. So that exposed me to a lot of cinema, the likes of which is really not made anymore. Just this kind of super B movie, creature feature type stuff. It's really good fodder to draw from. But like the one thing I would point to is like advice that will work pretty much across the board is go watch John Carpenter movies. Every John Carpenter movie is usable for about 4 different settings if you look at the way they're structured, right? Take Ghosts of Mars, for example. That movie has your train stuff on it. It's got that Western element, the frontier town element to it, but there's also a zombie movie in there and some ghosts worked into it. You'll never find a better story about paranoia than The Thing. You just
That's
won't,
true.
just study John Carpenter. He is an amazing storyteller, and he's really skilled at repurposing and reimagining existing stuff and putting a new fresh spin on it.
Okay, oh, that's great. And I know we said I'd save some questions to the end, but they're kind of relevant to kind of what we're talking about right now. One of them is from Otterpot. I'll post this on the screen. I think it kind of goes into maybe the Wild West part of it, where you kind of have, if you're in a desert, you have that long walk and you rely more on environmental cues. He asks, any thoughts on utilizing environmental storytelling in RPGs, which rely more on the descriptive side of things as opposed to kind of what's visually kind of going on in the background?
So you're talking about senses there, sort of like how the environment changes your perception of what you're feeling and that sort of thing.
That's probably what it.
I read it as like a senses, like describing the environment via senses.
Yeah. I mean, it all comes down to description, how you want to sort of word your thoughts, basically. If it's like it takes a little bit of like not training, but you need to be aware of yourself when you're speaking. What you're saying matters. Like if you describe something with a word which doesn't fit the setting or mood that you're trying to like invoke, it can really change the tenor of the entire scene. So if the squealing door that yawns across the bloodstain becomes the jaunty, happy squeal, which reveals the raspberry colour stain on the ground. These are 2 different things, even though it's mostly the same. You know what I mean? So you really need to be aware of how you want to describe it. And when it comes to environment, it's like you can talk about the sort of the bare tree branches, their fingers like reaching for the dead blank sky or whatever, to kind of invoke them sort of horror elements. But again, you've got to like color your environment with your words to really invoke them feelings. It's more narrative writing. Study writing if you want to be good at that, and how to become descriptive.
The environment can serve a lot of different purposes as well. So I have a scenario that I did for Goodman Games' Age of Cthulhu line many years ago. And it's set in, it also has a variety of settings, but the finale is set in the deserts, the Great Gobi Desert of India. And the PCs are part of a larger group of like-minded individuals who are going to be defending a location that happens to be a Yithian library, and the cult of bad guys have teamed up with sand dwellers who are going to come, and so it's 2 large forces coming together. Now, in a role-playing game where each player is running an individual, going into a large-scale battle can be challenging, right? And that feels more like a war game. And so I was trying to solve a problem on how do I present this, but still keep it down on a single player by single player type of combat, or at least have that opportunity. And the answer was the environment. So one of the sand dweller wizards casts sandstorm spell, and so that has one of my favorite lines from Star Trek, when in Star Trek 2, they're going to fly into the Mutara Nebula, and Spock says it's sauce for the goose. The odds will be even, right? With this sandstorm going on, all of the combat becomes individual mano a mano. You can't see the massive horde coming. It's just shadows, and then suddenly one person comes out of the shadows, and now each individual player can fight one individual person until they either force them to retreat or they retreat back into the hold. But I solved that problem that I kind of wrote myself into that corner, but of how do I have these two massive forces come at each other without it being a war game? I changed the environment, and so now it was just one-on-one.
There's something quite with your thinking of your players in mind as well, and depending on the type of game you're doing, are your players squishy humans trying to stop a cult? Are your players vampires? Are your players demons, demigods, whatever? I think there's an interesting thought there, building on what Graeme was saying, and your choice of how you present a situation. Because if you're choosing the language that presents it as this is something you should be scared of, or this is something that you find entertaining, or just that presentation of language, that practice of language that you can use. If you're a newer keeper as well, thinking carefully about what you're saying and how you're presenting it, because obviously a squishy human walking into an environment, or should we say a sandstorm, might consider it to be a very different thing to a vampire walking into a sandstorm, or a sand demon walking into a sandstorm. So there's a really, I think there's a practice there, and obviously that hooks all completely back into mood, atmosphere, the narrative that you're telling. It should very much be in your players should be completely in line with what you're doing in regard to creating that world. But that's a big job for a GM, a storyteller, and a keeper to maintain that, find the right words for those moments. And I suppose that only comes with practice, doesn't it?
Yeah, and the players can help out. The players can cotton on to what he's trying to do and help, and you can even ask them, how does this look to you? What do you perceive? What do you feel about these sort of aspects? And get them to describe what they're feeling. One of the worst things keepers can ever do is tell a player how they feel. They can invoke senses, but emotional feeling is something they should be telling you all the time.
Yeah,
and I think a couple of good tricks to pick up if you can, like look on YouTube for acting lessons, or go sit in and just what do they call it when you audit an acting class at the nearest university, because they talk a lot about this stuff, about what sort of senses will sensory input will invoke what sort of responses in people, and they sort of teach you how to study human behavior. Studying improv is probably not a bad idea either, just in terms of being able to do that stuff more quickly on the fly. But when you're structuring the story, so either as a guide or a GM or a keeper doing prep, or as the author that's writing it, you have the advantage of sort of knowing the full breadth of the story. You can start with the end and work your way backwards and start peppering in all these different things. And as you're giving it that final read through, you can kind of look at it and go, okay, what sense did I not hit? Okay, let's put that here.
Yeah.
What cool little Easter egg or what clue can we bury in this scene that's otherwise got nothing to do with the investigation other than it looks cool or it evokes X thing I was aiming for. Now we can pepper in a clue there to make that not only effective emotionally, but also a vehicle to drive the story forward. And as I think we had talked about a bit last night, some good old David Lynch weirdness never hurts. If you can put things 15% axis off of reality, off of the norm, that's always a very good trick to draw from.
Do you say that, Travis? I very stupidly, but also brilliantly, started rewatching the X-Files from the start the other day, and I'm loving just how I mean it is aged, and I'm pretending it hasn't, but I'm loving just how trippy some of those things were. I remember like there's the quite early on in the first season. There's do you remember Coombs? Is it Coombs?
Yeah,
The eyes and stretching and it was
Yeah.
just done in such a. I mean, it's, as I said, it's dated, but like I think what you're saying there, Travis, that kind of the axis just twisted just enough to make it so creepy and just and Coombs is a creepy character anyway, but he's kind of licking these newspaper things and building this nest, and there's no other real explanations to it. They don't answer a lot of the questions in it, and it's done really well. I think for a TV show where obviously we all love role-playing games, it's why we do what we do, and you can very much use your players and your keepers' imagination and these kind of imagined senses to create this world. You don't often get that with TV, but I think in that episode, in those moments, every time he was licking the paper, I just had this like that feeling of like, oh god.
Very mundane behaviors that are applied to very non-mundane situations, things like that. Chewing your nails is somewhat normal. Chewing somebody else's nails is weird. That will draw some.
That's going in the next scenario.
Yeah, if you really like that, Newman, you should try The Fringe if you haven't seen it. That's a really good one. Which is very
what
much,
is it, Graeme? Sorry.
The Fringe is very much an up-to-date.
Oh no, absolutely brilliant. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Yeah,
Muller's one of my favorite antagonists, sort of heroes in the world.
Fantastic.
He's the best character.
But that was done so. I always really liked in that you could sense that there was a clear sense of they knew where they were going with it, and because I have to say, and I'm sure to the chagrin of some of the people chiming in here, I loved Lost, but at the same time I knew that it was an absolute clusterfluff of narrative and where do we go, and everybody's worked it out. Do we change it? Don't we change it? The people who were writing that must have had an incredibly hard job, whereas Fringe, you got a real sense there was a clear narrative there, and even though they just had it mapped out, but even though they did that brilliant kind of this is unusual, that the degree has changed, the unusual is there, it was all everything was a part of that foundational kind of backbone and making it a stronger program for what it was. Fringe was brilliant.
Yeah, no, this discussion of the YouTube chat is going crazy with various kind of after the chewing someone else's nails, a bunch of examples are coming up. So you that's awesome. And
there's a lot of ways you can go with that. They don't necessarily have to be attached to the other person. I don't know if it's creepier if they are.
I just even having someone ask, just pass me your nails, thank you.
You're not getting them back.
Yeah, what a scenario. Your investigators go into this basement to get some information from somebody that owns a magic shop, and they're like, no, keep your money. Here's a set of nail clippers. Once all of you have contributed, I'll give you the answer. Like, what? And then they're going to spend this whole time thinking that that's for a magic spell or something, and then as he's relaying the details, he just goes into his bowl and starts that. That's a game that your friends will talk about for months and months and months to come, I promise.
And a scenario seed process probably someone's taking right now and is just writing down notes. Really,
100%. You say that though, and Ryan, you asked us earlier where like inspiration can come from for setting in these moments. Teen Titans cartoon that I watch with my children, which is brilliant. It is absolutely brilliant. I say I watch it with my children. I just watch it on my own if they weren't there. But there is their version of the Tooth Fairy is freaking terrifying, and it takes their teeth and it just crunches them and eats them and it grinds them, and it's done so well. But I think that's that is such an abstract program again that takes the norm and completely plays around with it.
Yeah, and that's you folks had kind of brought up all these old inspirations like The Thing and these older movies or even these old shows that are kind of what's the word, episodic, where my favorite when I was growing up was the Outer Limits, and I always liked those kind of shows because every new show was it was a scenario or it was an idea for something, and you never know what was kind of what was going to be next. So in kind of seeing all those different types of horror, whether it's shock horror or psychological horror, creeping horror. In terms of setting and maybe a little bit of atmosphere, in your folks' and experience and opinions, how do you think every kind of horror trope works in every setting, or do you think that each one shines in its own right with a particular trope?
I have strong opinions on this, so I'm going to dive in first here. Very, very, very talented creators working in highly supported environments can sometimes jump those lines without a great deal of caution and concern. Perfect example of that would be Cabin in the Woods, right? There's an awful lot of sci-fi chocolate in that horror peanut butter in Cabin in the Woods, but that was made by a very, very, very talented writing and directing team. When I would never try to caution someone away from stretching themselves creatively, but I really think it is important to identify what is the horror and what does it encompass when you're diving into your scenario, right? Because it's very easy to get pulled off of that by bells, whistles, moments of cool. My nail chewing NPC might not work so great if I'm trying to do a story that's a very sad, reflective tale about a teenage ghost from a suicide or something, right? That's not appropriate to put there. It will kill the mood. So making sure that the flavor of horror you're going for, I guess the subgenre maybe might be the right term. My fellow panelists can correct me if I'm wrong there, but make sure that subgenre is first. That's the thing that everything that you're tacking onto it is serving, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's the path of least resistance mostly. It's like these things evolve alongside the ideas that come to you when you're in these places. So if you're in an asylum, you tend to have a psychological horror, for example. It's just one of these things that can go into maybe some sort of gore aspect, but you're mostly going to go see that. And it's about, I was talking about the promise the other night there as well. It's like you're promising your audience something and they expect to get it. And if you don't give it to them, they're kind of annoyed with you, and you can be seen as pretentious for trying to do something if you can't pull it off properly. So there is these sort of things. It's like evolution. Like there's so many animals which look like a crab. There's so many animals that look like a turtle. It's like it's the same idea. Everything evolves from an idea that you had yesterday, and nothing's hugely original until you start mashing things together. And sometimes you get a gem, but other times you'll just get a mess.
Yeah, with that promise, there is, isn't there? There is a responsibility. There's got to be a fragility and a skill. I suppose, like Travis is talking about, if someone does have that incredible skill set and they are in a supported environment, they might be able to, take that crab and give you a lobster thermidor. But there is a delicacy with that, isn't there? Because I think you're right. If you're playing a game and you kind of go into that asylum, but then you realize it's something completely different, there's no psychological horror to it. It's just like, well, why set it in an asylum? Why have you led us down that path? There's but it's difficult, isn't it? Because I think we all appreciate quite a clever, subverting the norm twist of,
Yeah, I actually did one in an asylum. It was a modern day one, but it was time travel. So you go back to the 1800s on a ship, and you time travel again back to the future, but you end up in an asylum. But it's a movie set, and you're kind of like prompted to shoot this guy on the movie set who you think is going to come and take you away for a lobotomy because he thinks you're just one of the extras. And it just calls cuts after you shoot them. Or you try to do something mad, and then it's like you realize you're back in the modern day. And you're just on a Shutter Island sort of situation.
But that's because you're the skilled writer in a supportive environment who can do that, Graeme. That's right.
Now, I'll tell you that it's one of my scenarios that people sometimes go, "Oh, I don't know if I like that or not," sort of thing. But some people love it, and some people just think that's a bit weird, sort of thing. So it's about taste.
Well, and one thing too, and then I'm gonna rattle John's cage because we haven't heard from John for a second. So. But the one thing I want to touch base on that with that too is we are, when you're writing a scenario, right? When you are trying to play to as many tables as you can, but ultimately you have your target audience. These are the people that I think you're going to dig this, and if you've done your job well, they will dig it. When you are making your own game at your table, you have more direct rapport with the people at that table. Generally speaking, you know who they're going to be, you know what they're going to like, so that lets you tweak those expectations as well. If you're trying to write something and hope that everyone's going to walk away and have a grand time, that's a fool's errand. You're setting yourself up for disappointment. So just try to focus on making sure that the people who are going to get this are going to enjoy it, and that should be your aim. Would be my advice on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the aspects of horror that I enjoy the most, which is associated with environment, is isolation. And sometimes the setting is obvious for isolation, like a cabin in the woods, but sometimes the isolation is not as obvious. It might be in a high-rise apartment, right? Modern day high-rise apartment, and you would think that you can access any other apartment for help, or your cell phone or something, but having um, the slow discovery for the players, that as they try to go out, that no one is answering, or their calls aren't going through, or their calls do go through, but they only go through to doesn't matter who you dial, it's one person keeps answering and is laughing at them, and the being able to subvert and change the player's expectations of what they think the environment will provide, and then the environment doesn't provide that, or the environment provides different solutions, different resources, can be entertaining and part of the exploration of the game.
Yeah, for sure.
Silent Hill 4 does a really good job of that, of working with that element, the isolation, and having to sort of think your way out of this horrible situation. But it does a really good job of establishing the feeling of isolation.
Is that The Room, that one?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's real good for that.
Okay. It kind of leads to, I think, like trying to, like, the differences between one shots or mini set or multi sessions, like 3 or 4, or maybe even a campaign. In terms of keeping the atmosphere, or the atmosphere in a setting for a one shot, I would think would be maybe easier as a writer, from my view. Like I've never written a scenario, but I would seem it would be easier to kind of maintain it for 1 to 3, or 1, 2, or 3 sessions maybe, or a little bit longer. But how would how to say this? What is the best way to kind of keep the horror up if you're running like a longer form kind of scenario, or a longer story? Are there what have you done? What do you think you would kind of use to kind of I don't know, fill in the gaps maybe, or kind of like a along a longer period of time, or something like. Yeah, I'm just rambling now.
The description is always going to be, how are you describing the environment, and how will the players respond to that description, to that environment? And I'm not sure. I mean, because as long as you can keep it up, it would be the same if it was a shorter scenario versus a longer campaign. But having clear and enticing descriptions is key. One of the other games that I love is the Alien RPG, and and I really enjoy the scenarios that have been published with it so far, especially a 3-act. They call it a cinematic scenario because it's just this one thing. It's not intended, but you certainly could have your characters survive and go on to other adventures. But in this one, it's called Chariot of the Gods, and you're starting on one spaceship and you find a second spaceship, and then you cross over and start exploring that other spaceship that's been a derelict ship lost in space for decades. And touching upon things that are already in our lexicon of film and books and stuff. We have Aliens, where at the very beginning, salvage people find Ripley's lost vessel that's covered in ice on the inside. I use that all the time in Chariot of the Gods when they cross over and they get into the ship, and how everything is just frosted over and it's slippery. So if they get into a chase scene, the environment is affecting their ability to escape because it's covered in ice, or there is a corpse that can be found. And while it isn't described this way in the book, I've always decided that I will describe it in this manner, where you're coming down this frost-covered hallway, and maybe every 10 feet or so, the structure of the ship, is reinforced by having heavy, sturdy ribbing, like ribs in the hallway. So about every 10 feet, there's this rib that kind of sticks out from both the left and the right. And I always describe it this way because I feel like it has that element of a little bit of surprise horror. Is there is a corpse in that hallway, but I have it to where that guy is just on the other side of one of these ribs. So when you're approaching, all you see are these legs kind of, poking out from beyond the edge of the rib. And they're also covered in frost and, frozen to the ground. And as you come around and can now, get past that rib, and now you can see the torso and everything, you can see that this guy in a full spacesuit, put shotgun to helmet and blew his own head off. And there's the remains and everything, and the weapon, right? You found a weapon. But that adding in something like that ribbing, allowed me to have a surprise effect for when they come around, instead of them 20 feet away going, oh, well, I can see clearly there's a mess over there that someone committed suicide 80 years ago, right? So yeah, having, be familiar and be descriptive with your environment so that you can use it to have a little, not really a jump scare, but a shock surprise kind of thing.
There's also the difference between kind of like, either a single session or a campaign that happens in, I suppose maybe you call it like a static location, like Cult and Culpability that I'm writing, this Regency thing. It's in a seaside town, so part of the significant environment is the ocean. It's something there as an environmental factor, as a sound, as a the taste, the feel of it. You can swim in it, whatever, but sometimes those environmental factors that in a multi-session kind of scenario, they've been hearing it the whole time. To then remove the sound of it and create silence by removing an environmental factor that should be there, you're not giving them anything, you're taking something away, which can be just as I suppose horrifying and scary in that aspect. But I was going to throw Graeme in the spot here and say the opposite to it, if you're sorry Graeme, on the range of it. So I know Graeme's run quite crazily Masks of Nyarlathotep twice at the same time.
Yes,
so changing from location to location to location, that must be a hell of experience, Graeme, in terms of the environmental factors of each different key significant locations.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the one thing that actually it does really well. Masks, most of the chapters have a very similar setup, but the environment they sink you into and the atmosphere they sink you into is always very steeped in its location. And it really gives a flavor. I think that's what keeps it fresh, even though it's so old, is you can really get to know these cultures and that sort of thing about them, and how you approach the culture, or how the players approach the culture, alters how they would solve each of the sort of problems are there. Even though it's like um, take two, for example, Peru and Egypt. These are two relatively similar sort of setups for what you're doing there. But the way you deal with the cultures and how you get to them are very different. Where Egypt's a very much an older, sort of like larger city than you sort of deal with in Peru. You kind of go into the environment of the jungles in Peru as well, where you're left into the sands of the sort of like Sahara. Um, it's like you just have to use what's there to build upon the atmospheres. But I mean, I was running pulp in one of the groups and classic in the other, and that completely changed the tone and tenor of the environment and the atmosphere as well, because you're bringing in a far more, I wouldn't say cheesy, but gritty atmosphere for the pulp, because the characters are being, that's that sort of superhero, well, not superhero, but Indiana Jones level sort of like hero. So they would gloss over some of the stuff that the other team wouldn't. For example, things like the heat would affect you more, sort of thing, because you've got low hit points and these sort of thing. You got to be very careful what you're doing with your supplies. Where the pulp group would just easily coast with these things. So I think when you're dealing with environments, you've got to be aware of that too, of the sort of durability. As you were saying earlier, what is the team comprised of? What can they handle? It's like smaller things. If you're oblivious to it because it doesn't matter to you, you won't notice it in the environment at all. You can just walk over it. It's like, would you really care about a snake that is poisonous if you're immune to poison? No, it was just a snake, and you just ignore it, sort of thing. So you got to look out for what the players should look out for. What's dangerous to them, what's relevant to them, what keeps them alive, and what can kill them. And that was completely different because of the systems I was using more than anything else. But the environments, yeah, the townscapes and the sort of raw savagery of some of the sort of more rural environments really kept it fresh, because you're going from city to complete survival or back again, sort of thing. I think Australia is probably the hardest one for that, because you're in the deep desert there. And you're sort of relying on lunatics of taking you into this sort of sandstorms. There's no way back. You just got to keep going forward, basically. So yeah.
Well, and go ahead. Sorry, I didn't.
No,
I
go.
thought you. I was going to say the one thing I'd suggest about maintaining your maintaining that tension, I would say, should only really be like the main goal if you're in a short form. If you're talking about it over the course of a campaign, my biggest advice would be do not maintain that tension, because like anything, it's going to eventually turn into a drone, a note, a single thing in the background that the players are now immune to. It is the sound of the ocean. If you don't, you have to get some levity in there. You have to get just some sort of a gear shift every once in a while. Now that's much easier to, I think, address and mitigate at the table than it is as a writer creating the scenarios. But I think, the writer can put in some beats that might happen. And I think sometimes the players will just naturally do that on their own. Like, you don't have to goad them on too much. But if you feel like things are starting to turn sort of monochrome, there's no reason not to throw a curveball and pop in a funny beat, pop in, a happy beat, think about all the things that people do in the real world when life is tragic and terrible as it often is. Yet in the face of that, they will do, they'll play a game. They'll, have a family dinner. They'll get together. They'll go out for drinks. Incorporating those types of moments into your story, I think, is vital to making the actual horror hit.
Yeah, I think going back to Max, that's kind of why I split the book up and kept them in chapters. I played 1 month for a chapter and then stopped for a month and went back to it for a month. And you start from scratch when you start a new chapter. They've got their downtime, they've done all that, they've got their safe space, they've relieved themselves of all that tension, and then they've got to build back up the dread from start. But one thing you can do to sort of look at dread from a longer point of view is repetition of symbolism and that sort of thing to kind of clue the characters into sort of themes you want to explore in certain environments. Like Egypt was all about cats for me. There's a very small side quest or sidetrack about Bast, and it became the main feature of both of the campaigns. They loved it because it was a little bit more levity to the actions of the cats, and one of the groups even managed to turn into cats at one point to do it. That was a pulp lot, I must admit, but they were actually cats at one point, and they enjoyed that stuff. But then it got very dark, and they didn't like Bast after that.
Really, yeah. I think Travis kind of saying that, and Graeme building on it. Right, when I'm teaching my students about structuring, creating tension and suspense is a key thing. And we often use this kind of analogy of a metaphor of your audience members are like an elastic band, and it's this idea of you can stretch them to a certain point, but then you need to relax them. You can stretch them too far, and it is this idea of building, relaxing, but knowing when those beats come. Because if you go too big, you're just going to snap it, and they'll stop caring, and they won't care. Or if you go too big and you hold that suspense that for too long, it just becomes slack, and they get used to it again. So you either snap them and they don't care, or they get used to it. So you've got to kind of play those beats over time, and manipulate your audience, manipulate positively and with them involved, your players in this respect, rather than an audience, and they will willingly kind of go along with you. If you kind of giving them the opportunities to experience those high levels of growing tension, those moments of held suspense, but then those moments, Graham's talking about those moments of change in the narrative, a beat in the narrative, a break in it, so that they got a chance to kind of, I don't know, it's like being in a fancy restaurant and having a sip of water between courses, is it? I don't know. I haven't been there. But palate cleanser. Thank you. That's the one. Yeah, that's what I call it.
A lemon sorbet.
Can I have water with my McDonald's, please? Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No. And one thing you folks have kind of mentioned, kind of going back and forth, and the kind of different kinds of horror. And when anyone kind of hears horror, they always think scary, or something's behind the corridor, or something's behind the door, someone's hiding, anything really. But on the outskirts of that, in your opinion, or kind of, have you ever written it in your own horror scenarios? Humor is. Do you think humor should exist in horror?
Ooh, I'm going to be controversial here, so no straight away before anyone else to get out of there.
I'm going to loudly disagree with
yeah,
Graeme.
that's absolutely fine. Why I say that is, like, try not to write the horror. Write the humor into the scenario. You can try it, and you can have like sort of like jests and quips sort of thing that can amuse, but the players and the keeper have to come up with the humor. Everything can be humorous if it happens at the table, but it depends on the group. You can present something that can fall flat. I've always seen scenarios which are meant to run totally straight turn into absolutely like clown fests, and the other way around as well, and that comes from the player and the heart of the keeper sort of thing. I think writing the scenario straight is better, and just letting the players sort of like do what they want with it. And if it's humor, that's cool. But yeah, I think it can fall flat, especially podcasting as well. That sort of thing gets like that in. It's like if the players don't click with humor, it can really feel cringy and bad, and that's not a good look.
I soften my rebuke. I agree with you that you shouldn't write it. You shouldn't write it in to the scenario.
Cool. We're still friends.
Mostly. I like, so for example, I did again, I guess some of this falls into what genre of horror you're working on. I did the jumpstart for They Came From Beneath the Sea, which is called Party Beach Creature Feature. And
cool.
it's, these, it's a 1950s monster movie mixed up with reefer madness. These sea creatures are attacking the beach because they've become addicted to seaweed that was created for the government. Spoilers. There's no way to write that scenario and not have humor in the writing. But I did try to keep it did try to convey like this is what has to be done as cleanly as possible. So I think yes, in terms of like getting it communicated to the keeper, absolutely. But if you're talking about for running at a table, I think that anytime that often your players will take care of it, your players will tell you where to go with the humor. But if anytime that you feel that humor will give you just even a momentary break and a momentary beat, a moment to bring that elastic back in, deploy it, and I think it'll usually work out okay.
I was just
go ahead.
Sorry, a very quick, John. I promise you, because I'm not going to join in this battle of titans here with this fantastic thoughts. What I'm going to do is sit on the fence because it seems like a safe place to be. What I was going to say is horror and comedy, in terms of the construction of both of them, they are so incredibly difficult, and there are so many similarities in regard to your kind of contracts with the audience, their buy-in to it. So I think that I haven't written anything comedic, probably because I'm not very funny, but I haven't written anything comedic into any of my scenarios. But I have found those moments, and even before this, I ran a game here at the Illusion Con just before coming on here. Very serious scenario. My players turned it into a right Scooby-Doo fest, and it was so much fun. It was really, really good fun, and we all kind of agreed to go in that direction with it, and it made it great. It made it great fun. But I do think that I've got a huge admiration for that idea of writing comedy into horror or vice versa, because I think there's so many shared skills and that expectation with the audience with horror and comedy, really challenging things to do. Sorry, John.
No, I think that's great. And I don't have a lot of experience in writing comedy. I would say I have zero experience, or maybe just a 1%. Because I do have one scenario that the genesis idea for it was, I thought, funny, because something can be funny until it becomes not funny. And then it becomes worrisome, right? So I have a scenario that I wrote called The Silent Clouder. And for those who don't know, a clouder is the collective noun for cats, right? And so the way that this scenario works, and this is an isolated investigator scenario, so it's one keeper, one player. That's the way it's designed. But it has been played with a standard setup. But the player, the way the setup is, and there's a whole questionnaire that opens this thing up about how the player walks to work. What direction you go to walk to work, or walk to catch a bus or something. And so that character, that player's route, takes them past a house, and they start to notice that there's 4 cats sitting in the yard, silently just sitting there like cats do, sitting up, very prim and proper, tail curled around their feet. And they're all just staring at the house. And it's one of those things where you go, that's odd, a little funny, kind of odd. And so it just keeps going as the player is going to work and coming home, back and forth, back and forth. The only piece that you mention and talk about is how there's 4 cats when you see it the first time. There's 9 cats when you see it next. There's 15 cats when you see it again. And the number keeps increasing in front yard and backyard, all around. And they're all dead silent. The silent clouder. They all just, as we now hear a cat in the background. these cats are just sitting there, and it becomes comical, right? And then eventually, when there's potentially 100+ cats in this yard silently staring at this house, eventually the investigator's like, well, now this is just too weird. Now I have to go check it out, because clearly something's going on and the cats are doing something with this house and we have to figure out what it is, and so that's when the investigator goes. But the genesis for that was, I thought, wouldn't it be kind of funny if just cats are sitting there staring at a house?
Yeah, just to touch on that. Yeah, humor does work with horror in a lot of ways. When you're talking about it, it's like it is that break, as Autopoet was saying in the chat. There's the kind of our bedfellows, especially gallows humor when it comes to horror. But comedy will kill horror dead for that tension break and that reason. So it's one of the reasons why it has to come from the players, because it's all about pacing and delivery. Is what makes good comedy. It's like if you try to write it in and the keeper's not on the same page of what you're trying to tell them and how to deliver it, it can come over as just wrong. And that's why it kind of have to be, it come from the actual person delivering the comedy. So it is that sort of angle as well. I mean, I do like script edits for our podcast as well, Ain't Slade Nobody, which is a comedy horror podcast as well. And we do inject we sort of punch up some of the NPCs for that. And we wrote one character for Scott Dorwood called Grist, who's a pompous professor. And I remember writing him up a bit as well. So you can kind of do it in writing, but again, it was in post, so everything else was already structured around it just to give him a little bit more levity. So that's the only place I can say I've done it properly.
Okay, so I think it's a good segue to actually the ambience of a particular scenario. Whether, let's say, sci-fi, you're on a ship, you have creepy sounds, deck plates, footsteps on steel gratings, or out in the Wild West, you have the wind, tumbleweed blowing by, or something like that. So when you've written your scenario and you go to play test it, and you want to bring that, you want to try different tools to kind of bring your setting or bring the atmosphere alive. Might be a little bit easier online to do that with all the different tools, or in person. But personally, what do you try to, or what do you use when you try to kind of bring that atmosphere or the ambience at the table to playtest scenario or things of that nature?
I will, like Travis. I feel strongly about this, so I'm going to jump in first. I don't do anything. I play in brightly lit rooms. I don't use sound. I don't do any of that. I play in brightly lit rooms because I have a hard enough time seeing my papers and my notes. I don't need dim lighting to make that worse, right? I want to be able to see my dice and see the results of the dice. I want to be able to see my notes and what's going on with that. Sound effects, like electronic sound effects, whether it's just mood music or actual sound effects, I can't keep up fast enough, right? The players will move faster, the game will move faster than the sound effects can keep up. And if I continue to stop to try and reset a track or hit a different button, or God forbid, technology issues crop up, we kill the momentum of the game. Any kind of suspense and momentum that we've been building up is absolutely destroyed. Besides, if I say, you're in a train car, a steam train, and the train car is rocking, and you can hear the click clack of the wheels as they're going by, and the steam whistle blows, and ahead of you in the darkness you think you heard the cock of a gun. Someone just cocked a revolver. I describe those as sounds and setting, and every individual person played those sounds in their head. But each individual person probably played a different sound, probably played it in a different way, but it didn't matter because it was exactly the right way for the person who was thinking it, instead of me playing a sound and saying, this is what you hear, right? So I'm not really one to try and change the actual real life environment that we're in, with ambient lighting and ambient sound. Maybe I'm just lazy or a curmudgeon, but that's me.
I too am both of those things, and I agree with you for the most part. I have a problem that I absolutely acknowledge is a me problem, which is my brain will shut off if music comes on. I just can't think straight, that's very much on me. That's very much a personal thing. Having said that, though, I've curated music for and sound effects for a sort of digital box set release that we did for Trinity Continuum Assassins. Not horror, but it's more of an action story. But the idea of putting together that immersive playlist definitely is something I'm familiar with. Definitely something that makes sense. I really recommend, if people are looking for stuff like that, to check out sites like freesound.net, where you can just type in whatever it is you're looking for and find 500, Creative Commons or public domain sounds of, for that. But yeah, I can't hang with candlelight and music. I just can't do it. And that's probably from age and curmudgeonliness.
I've got so again, I'm playing with my mates, we're playing in a room. We're probably going to do that because that's kind of playing in the room, and I'm not going to rig my lighting to change in the house because I can't even get Alexa to turn the bloody lights on in the first place, let alone do anything fancy. But I swear my wife's just changed it so it doesn't recognize my voice. I think that's actually what's happened. But I have to say, so I am very lucky to trial something, and I was been very privileged. One of the Miskatonic Playhouse team, one of our lead editors, Cosmic, who I know Graeme knows really well as well, is absolutely fantastic, and he loves trying stuff and getting on board and just kind of playing with bits and bobs. And I ran a scenario for the Miskatonic Repository Convention, and we ran it for the organisers as a bit of a thank you for them running it. And it was called Signal to Noise, and it was all about like static communications, aliens, all this kind of stuff. It's actually a brilliant scenario, really, really good fun. But I'd managed to meet up with Cosmic beforehand. This is like once in a lifetime prep. You'd never do this for your normal kind of games. This is very much a special occasion. But basically sat down with Cosmic, and we talked about, wouldn't it be cool, if this stuff happens, we could do this kind of stuff, or we could do this. So I actually, and it was a bizarre experience, but it was such a cool thing to be able to do. Cosmic basically acted as my DJ for sound effects for monsters, and it felt super cool. But also all of that John and Travis are talking about there, about having the mental capacity to even try and think about the sound effects and things that you're doing. I didn't have to do any of that. I was very lucky in that situation that we were doing this Twitch thing. Cosmic was probably working 10 times harder than I was, just keeping the story, because he was kind of going, oh my God, what's Newman doing next? Where's he going? What are the players doing? And again, it wasn't overly done. It wasn't like I walk, click, 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 I open a door. It wasn't that at all. It was more kind of atmospheric stuff, and then some great kind of like, monster noises, which is exactly what you want. But I was very privileged to be in that situation, and we used a Sirenscape to kind of do that. And it was so much fun. I think it was a bit experimental, but it was so much fun having that kind of Sirenscape there, and then Cosmic live DJing it. But yeah, it was quite an experience. It was quite an experience. But normally I think it's the actor in me. If there's a monster making a noise, I'm probably making that noise because I enjoy it.
If I ever win the lottery, I will definitely hire that guy from the Police Academy movies to just stand by me as I'm GMing, and he can go, oh god, as the boat's coming into the harbor, and he can do all the other sounds. That would be awesome,
Yeah.
That would be. That was exactly where my mind went when you said that.
I'm sure they'll still write an AI script, so they'll just pick up exactly what you're saying and play back the noise you're mentioning. One day that'll happen.
Yeah.
But Cosmic's pretty good at what he does. He really puts on the flair, and John, I remember the Aliens by How We Roll and all the sound effects they put into that. That was in post, however.
That was all post.
That is pretty nice as well. And we do a lot of post in Ain't Slade as well. Cup's incredibly good at sound design. He's fantastic, and some of them really sell. And we're doing audio dramas now as well because of it. As well, but when it comes to the table and using these devices and stuff like that, it can get in the way if you're doing it solo. How We Roll did the same DJ stuff that Cosmic did as well for The Code. If you've not seen that, John, you should probably watch it. I know you're a massive fan of that, so
love it.
But yeah, it's you have to have a setup, and I think Playhouse has probably got all the right people. It's kind of lightning in a bottle. Everyone's got that kind of role for doing that Twitch sort of stuff. So you're probably the best to do it with Stuart as well, to put his spin on it. But yeah, I don't tend to use a hell of a lot. I have commissioned music for my Wild West stuff before, just because there wasn't a lot there, and we commissioned a couple of things for Ain't Slade as well, just for some punching up some of the finale sort of thing to make them feel a bit more unique. But yeah, it's stuff that's played in the background and all that thing. However, I am by trade I'm a model maker, a sculptor, and that's kind of what I used to do for a long time. If I was going to play in person again, and I was going to do all that something, I'd probably make my own props, and that would be the big thing that'd be sort of focus on if I was going to bring another element in. But storytelling, you hang on the word of the keeper, and anything else can be a distraction from that.
Yeah, no, and I just wanted to bring up Basil. He had kind of brought up that question that kind of spurred this discussion. But I from where you folks kind of started to where we kind of ended up, it sounds like it just depends on the application. Like if you're running it personally with your friends or with someone online. I totally agree. I've tried not sound effects, but like background music and things like that. Sometimes players don't like it. Sometimes, like for me, when I'm trying to think in GMing, nah, no way. My brain goes offline or to some other place. But when it comes to the pre-made audio drum, like the audio dramas where you had mentioned for Ain't Slade or Trinity, I find like when I listen to those are like the sound or the background. I find it works really well in those applications. And actually, one from the Ain't Slade, for example, was Harlan Guthrie with.
Oh yeah. So this year, yeah.
No, his stuff. That was really those were really nice audio dramas, and I've listened to my fair share of Ain't Slade Nobody, and those are especially in the Old West, putting in all those little cues and things really bring out the very atmospheric for me, and they bring out the setting and kind of help me as a GM, or they do help me as a GM. So I'm pretty sure other people kind of do as well. So yeah, okay, yeah, no, it's just
There was one thing that I used to do when I was younger, when I was back in the 90s. I used to make like mix CDs for each of my players in my campaign. that were basically like a reflection of how I saw their character, and or how I wanted their character to feel in the world, things like that, for them to listen to on their own time, which turned out to be pretty fun and relatively effective. I don't know how that would work nowadays, if that would work nowadays, but it was something that worked for me, back in high school with my friends. Worth giving it a shot. Make some playlists on Spotify for your players and see what they think of that.
Give them a theme song. Yeah, you have to explain what a CD is for
Exactly.
some people.
Make a mixtape.
Right. See, back in the day, there were these little round. Yeah.
Have to send him a TikTok now.
I'll be
Yeah.
spending the rest of my of the panel time just shaking my fist at a cloud over there.
Okay. How can we'll go to kind of a little bit of talk about maybe settings or even subgenres. How do different settings like sci-fi or Old West or 1920s or Regency or modern day, when you're writing your scenarios or using the horror tropes or trying to bring a few together, in terms of pacing the scenario or the horror, what kind of techniques do you think that you could kind of write into a scenario to help a GM, or that you have used to kind of help the pacing of a horror kind of thing? Like, do you if it's a creeping horror, do you can you it comes out slowly throughout the whole scenario, or can you use it as a can you insert a shock scare every once in a while, or yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and the environment can be a broad way for you to put a timer on the game. Like, a major horror is coming, and you're setting that in the background. You've got a huge storm going, thunderstorm, snowstorm, a hurricane, something going, but something is building. The storm is building and getting larger and larger. I grew up in Houston, and during hurricane season, I mean, people are always acutely aware of where the storm is going and how fast it's moving, and you can just look out the window and see things changing as the sky goes green and the rain comes, and then the hail comes, and then the rain and the hail get heavier, and so you could design a scenario where everything's going on, and externally, there's the storm, but as that storm gets more intense, the horrors get more intense inside. You could punctuate, it's a little on the nose, but you could punctuate some kind of reveal with a bolt of lightning, right? Very on the nose, but in small doses could be effective.
Another place, though, where horror and comedy are side by side, because that can also be an extremely funny way to punctuate something.
Caught in the headlights.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that tracking the environment with the growing tension, suspense, the building atmosphere, you're creating a mood, aren't you? And by creating a mood, that's what the players are feeling. And so I think kind of building that environmental aspect of it. And I know we're talking about the setting here, but the setting can help create that environmental aspect. So if it is, if you're on a boat and you've got this growing kind of storm, then you've got the growing impact on the ship or the boat or the kayak, whatever it is that the players are on, and that kind of builds and builds and builds with the events and perhaps the horror that is evolving as well. So you kind of have that the environment evolves along with the sense of horror as you go, which is I think can be quite a cool thing. You can kind of, you're almost kind of telling your players that the horror is building without telling them that the horror is building, because you're doing it through the environmental setting factors. It doesn't even have to be environmental factors. It could be that the social reactions. We talked about the social environment earlier. It could be the social environment is heightening, getting to a mad place. I know, with the Regency setting, the ballroom is pretty much expected. If you're not going to a ball in the Regency Call of Cthulhu, then you've obviously pissed someone off. But to have a ball and then to have horror growing, it's kind of cool to see that reflected in the people dancing or talking or the musicians, and you kind of see that social environment change in relation to the growing horror.
Better be a masquerade ball.
Yes,
all I'm saying.
100%.
I mean, staff go to the balls as well. Come on.
One thing that I think, speaking as from a writing perspective, I think it's easier for you to control the sort of gross movement of those things. This is the way that the setting is during the scene, or this is the way it progresses during the scene. But I think if you can find ways through your writing to empower the guide to give them tools to adjust that on the fly, that's a good way to do it. I know if you can have like lists of elements that might pop up. Graeme fell apart. Oh no. Welcome back, Graeme. I hope you're back. But having like a list of things that one might be able to drop in to speed things up or slow things down. Lists of descriptors, things along those lines can come in very handy from a writing perspective. And if you're, a guide or a keeper and you're running a game and that's not present in the scenario you have, making some of those for yourself on some index cards or, on a phone app or something can also come in very handy at the table.
Yeah, I mean, the environment and setting is very good for controlling the pacing of basically what's going to happen. The sort of like the ramping of dread and suspense and paranoia. You get that fever pitch from being in a crowd that dislikes you. You can be very isolated in a very crowded room if you're not part of the in crowd. I said yesterday about being a Cassandra, being someone who's not believed, and you're scared to tell anyone in case they're not who they say they are, and that paranoia level can get to a fever pitch, especially in a masquerade ball when society is very particular and about how to do things, how to approach subject matter, and the proper way of doing things. They won't listen to you unless you act in a proper way, which is very hard when you're scared and running for your life.
Yeah.
The other thing you can do with environment is take away sensory perceptions from the players. You can tell them there's something there, or they hear something, or they can see a particular sort of like shape or figure on the horizon, and then you remove that sensory from them by some sort of environmental. As I said, the sandstorm. If you see something before a sandstorm rolls in, it just blows up past them. Or if you're in say you're in a collapsed building and it's completely dark, and these what's left of what you can move around in, and you hear scuttling, but you can't see a damn thing, and the only thing you're describing to the players is what they could touch, feel, and hear, but not see. That can really build the dread to another level. So removing these things as well. Sometimes it's good to be very very tight with what you're giving them, and never flood them with information. Always have that pause, always give them a little bit of information and make them ask a question to get more. And that's another way to build horror. Be very clipped with your answers and very low with your voice, and you'll sort of build that dread. And it'll soon become panic and terror and death.
Yeah, no, that's the way when I run my cult games. Usually, that's or what I've kind of tend to try to do. Less information is better, and then it's kind of builds up, because they like you don't think you're being scary, but in the player's mind, it's like they're freaking out on the end. Like you sometimes you can see it. Sometimes you can see it on their face that they're just,
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah.
You also need to give it time to process. It's just one of those things.
Well, and 100% for me, one of the hardest things to cope with at the table is when all of a sudden everybody's at a 9, and that's not where I expect. Like, and I was expecting them to be at a 3. I'm like, oh crap! How do I dial this down? Breathe. It's
a fake jump scare. Throw a fake jump scare. That'll be fine.
Right. Yeah. That is usually a very good time for a humor beat. When something like that happens.
Okay. Yeah. No. We're just a few minutes away. There was one question that was before we end. This is has been a great discussion. I've loved everything that's kind of been brought up and your views and everything. But there's one person from the beginning, Ali Star McGuffin, and he kind of brings up a good point. Like when in these horror panels and everything like around Call of Cthulhu, Cult, they came from series, Wraith, and all these other kind of settings, 1920s, modern day. Is it hard to translate this kind of feeling to a fantasy-based world, like Forgotten Realms or some other setting that kind of you've maybe thought of?
I just had the great and immense pleasure and honor of working on The World Below, which is the new Story Path Ultra game from Onyx Path. And it is a fantasy game, there's no doubt. It is set in a fantasy world, it has fantastical elements, but survival horror is a big part of that game. You live in an environment that actively wants to kill you on its best day. And it dips into body horror, it dips into claustrophobia, dips into all different sort of flavors and subgenres of horror. And I think they absolutely can be quite productive in those environments. I think it is more difficult to do if you're doing it in a system that assumes a certain level of heroic competence on the part of your characters, right? A Cthulhu scenario is far more terrifying in Cthulhu than it is in D&D, because in D&D you might be able to punch him in the nose, stuff like that. But yeah, I think that making sure that you've got heroes that are attuned to vulnerabilities and then playing on those vulnerabilities can create horror in a fantasy setting. And I highly recommend The World Below for anybody to check it out. Not just because I worked on it. I worked with an amazing crew on that. Ed Greenwood did a lot of the world development. Matthew Dawkins came up with it. So just a brilliant setting. So,
yeah, I think horror is completely natural in a fantasy setting. Robert Howard's Conan, it's a sand and sword kind of setting, but tons of horror in that. Howard loved horror as much as he loved adventure. Of course, Ravenloft, I saw it noted in the chat, is one of the classics. The Deserts of Desolation by the Hickmans. That's the I series. It's a three module series. That one's got a lot of like Egyptian style horror. Something that I also really enjoy. I don't know if it'll come through very well, but this is the Tomb of the Black Sand. This is a great, traditional D&D, old school D&D module, but it's filled with vampires, werewolves, ghosts, and it can be run very much like a gothic horror adventure, and it's very, very cool, a lot of fun. I think it's fantasy is a great setting for horror.
Yeah, grim dark's a massive trend right now. If you haven't read Joe Abercrombie, go read them right now. I wouldn't maybe call it total horror, but it's very bleak, it's very dark, and it's very sort of in your face. I think you're right when it comes to the horror level. level, Travis. Definitely the heroic sort of deeds and attitudes really kills any sort of idea of being terrified, because being terrified is being the victim, and heroes don't want to be the victim or don't see themselves as a victim. One setting which does do it very well is Games Workshop's Warhammer 40k. They are very heroic, very godly, even, and it is a horrific universe that they walk around in. Everything from the dullest detail to the most enlightened being has this almost creeping horror to it, and it's a dreadfully wide and deep pond to get lost in if you really want to look at how heroes and horror can work together. That's just spellbinding, some of the stuff, especially Dan Abbott writes. He's a masterclass in that sort of stuff. With fantasy, yeah, it's like it's still medieval as long as the magic isn't overpowered and can do whimsical things on without consequence. It can definitely work as long as everything has a consequence, and the consequence isn't good, and you have these trolley problems. The horror will come naturally.
Okay. And with that, that is the end of the importance of setting an atmosphere in horror RPGs. Once again, I'd like to thank all of you for being here tonight for the Illusion Horror and Con. But before we go, just to give you the opportunity to just who you are, if you want to give anything to plug that you're working on or put anything out there, go ahead. Newman?
So I'm T.A. Newman. I'm the host of the Miskatonic Playhouse, and I'd say come check us out. You can find us at www.miskatonicplayhouse.com. And from there, you can find our YouTube, you can find our podcast, and also, you can just kind of find a pretty good horror community to get involved in, really. Hopefully we'll see you there.
Cool. Thank you. Mr. John Hook?
Just please check out the Modern Mythos podcast. We're going on 2 years now and having a lot of fun. If you're a fan of Seth Skorkowski's YouTube work, you can find him, just talking with me and yapping, and we have a good time with it.
Cool. And Travis?
My name is Travis Legge. My pronouns are he and they. When I'm not running games over at the Onyx Path Twitch, I am writing them. The most recent game that I released for my own company was Out of Season Overlords. It's a Savage Worlds fantasy setting. Other than that, please check that out. It's up on Drive-Thru RPG. And please check out The World Below. It's available on BackerKit right now. And I think if you pre-order it, you can get the unformatted manuscript. It's a really, really fun world, and I'm really proud of it. So please head over to BackerKit and check it out.
Thank you. And Mr. Patrick?
Yeah, Graeme Patrick, I work with Ain't Slayed Nobody. Go and check them out and their vast back catalogue now of great one-shots and campaigns alike. We just hit 1 million downloads as well, so we're very pleased with that. And personally, if you go and check out RPG Nook YouTube channel for some scenario breakdowns and advice on how to run Call of Cthulhu and a few other horrors, that'd be cool as well. And yeah, I'm working on a couple of things in the background, but they're not ready to talk about yet. Oh, and in the new year, if you check out the new Magnus Protocol, my episode's number 3 on the new season.
Ooh. Is that from the Magnus archives?
Yeah.
Oh,
it's the relaunch of it. Their RPG broke tons of stuff. It looks like it's going to be a good one as well.
I'm the backer who broke the back, I think. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. And everyone on YouTube and Twitch, thanks for joining, and enjoy the rest of the con. Enjoy your evening.